Welcome to the FNO InsurTech Podcast, a place where movers and shakers from all points within the insurance ecosystem gather and discuss all things InsurTech. Here are your hosts, Lee Boyd and Rob Beller.
Well, hey, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. What a good day we have. I am joined today with Leighton Healey, the co-founder and CEO of KnowHow. Welcome to the podcast, Leighton.
Yeah, thanks, Lee. Great to be here. And I'm excited for our conversation today.
It's going to be a good conversation. We are excited to hear all about yourself and all about the company. But first, you got to tell us, you're not in the U.S. today, right? Where are you today?
So I am often in the U.S. and I'm in the U.S. probably maybe nearly 30 times a year. And so I do spend a lot of time south of the border. But today I'm located just outside the Canadian Rockies. And so when people think about, some postcard that they maybe received from some, kind of quirky Canadian, oftentimes that postcard has some picture of like Rocky Mountains or whatnot. And so I live in a city called Calgary, and I live just down the road from a popular spot called Banff. And I live here. My wife and I, we've been here for a number of years. I moved here as a great city to build businesses. I moved here to do that, and it's been great. And we have two little boys, 4 and 1, and
Wonderful.
so we keep a full life.
I love that. So were you born in Canada?
I was not actually. I was born in Colombia. I was born in South America.
Oh, wow.
And so I've lived in many places. In fact, I was telling someone yesterday who was asking if I could help them move and not to, if I would be too much trouble. I said, man, I have moved over 30 times.
Oh,
And so, so I have moved many times. And it's not because I'm in a run with the law, but because some of it was, just moving countries. And some of it was actually, uprooting to cities to take on new opportunities. But primarily, it was, outside of this, I'm also pretty active, on the property side and pretty active, kind of buying and acquiring properties. And so, that kind of, also led to some of that. But I grew up in Colombia, South America.
Okay.
And so if you look at the top of South America, Colombia is kind of that tip of South America. You kind of got both the Atlantic and the Pacific on either side. And so, I lived in a time where a lot of people might be familiar with like the Pablo Escobar era. And so I lived just kind of at the close of his era. And if there's interest, we can get into it, man. They got some interesting. We could talk cartel. We could talk kidnappings.
I bet you saw some amazing things. I bet you saw some. So when did you leave? How old were you whenever you left there?
I was about 9 or 10. Or 10. So my parents were originally like farmers from kind of like the equivalent of like the Midwest of Canada, and so they were working internationally, and so they worked through Central America and South America, and my dad spent some time doing kind of leadership development work in the Caribbean. And so, that whole kind of, let's call it that like Latino Hispanic culture had a big formative impact in my life. My sister's adopted from there. I have a citizenship there. So I don't know how many, Latino listeners you have, but, I love all of it, and,
That's
wonderful. And I honor my Latino friends by being, not being as punctual as I probably should be.
Well, that's great. Well, I mean, it takes, a lot of times our history and our past mold us into what we are today. And so today we want to know about KnowHow, right? It's your company. You co-founded it. You're CEO. Give our audience some time. What is KnowHow? What does it do?
So in its most simplest form, KnowHow is an app that lives on people's iPhones or Androids or tablets or desktops. And it's become the most popular solution to a very common problem is how do I equip my team from day one with the way that we do things in just the hustle and bustle of our day. So you could think about know-how as like kind of a tool that came along and did away with the outdated idea of like an operations manual, or kind of like filling a SharePoint folder full of all these documents that we never really get to, but we know we should reference. And, but then it's much broader than that. So the way that we do business today, it includes, vendor partners, software equipment, includes laws and regulations and carrier guidelines. And I could go on and on and on and on. Essentially, there is so much information that we use to do the job. And so you can think about know-how as a private app that a company uses to bring all that knowledge together in an environment that's branded to their company. And it just becomes a single source of how we do things in every department of a company. And so we work with a lot of the franchise brands, we work with a lot of the independents. And so in a short manner of time, we're very thankful to have had hundreds of property restoration companies choose know-how as the tool to onboard, train, and equip their workforces with, I guess you call like on-the-go guidance of how to get the job done. And so I think probably with underneath all of that, the plumbing of know-how, we've pioneered a lot of the large language model, kind of generative AI, kind of machine learning elements that people are probably familiar with when they think about tools like Gemini and ChatGPT and stuff like that. That is kind of our neck of the woods in terms of those generative type of models. And so we, in a sense, give a company the ability to centralize how they do things, but then use all of these cutting edge technologies to be able to do things with their knowledge that they just did not think was possible, and frankly was not possible even 12 to 24 months ago.
So give me an example of that. And first, I want to make sure the audience, and we talked about this in the opening, I'm sure, your main customer is the property restoration industry. Is that right?
So right now we have what we would say is like kind of our bread and butter. And so today our bread and butter would be would be growth minded property restoration contractors who have teams that are, they aspire to have or exceed, 20 or more staff, where they really have experienced, let's call it enough, like operational moving parts to say, I just cannot be everywhere at once.
Yeah.
And we work with, I have a large background in franchising. I had a very successful time as a franchisee and a franchisor for a decade.
Okay.
And so we also have a bread and butter in network modeled systems, so franchise models. And so when you think about a franchise, Lee, think about like a three-legged stool, like a brand that we share, a very specific contract, and then a system. Some people refer to as a business in the box. And so for many franchise networks, know-how is the modern box. It is the modern home of their system that's branded to them, and it becomes a tool that centralizes a shared playbook across all their locations. But know-how is a tool where we service multiple verticals, multiple industries, because it doesn't matter if you're a contractor or an insurance professional or a carrier or a franchise network, where you have a distributed team and where you experience factors like turnover or language barriers or just high stakes tasks. And when those tasks sometimes change, then technology can really remove some of those costly errors and some of those frictious barriers. So focus on property restoration and franchise networks, but more broadly, we support clients in a broad variety of industries.
And so companies are using your tool to onboard and to train their employees. Does it take place of an HR? Does it take place of a training team? Or is it in conjunction with all these other groups within a company?
It would give training teams and HR teams superpowers that they didn't think that they would ever have at their fingertips. So as an example, traditionally training teams the way that you traditionally facilitate learning and training and support are in ways that are often just very cumbersome
Hmm.
and they're hard to be able to adapt when things change. So, I remember when I was a franchisor for a decade, we were heavy into learning management systems, heavy into, printed binders and handouts and manuals. And I mean, the biggest, the biggest concern for us was why doesn't anyone use it? And two, when it changes, it just takes so much time for us to
Yeah.
facilitate change down to the front lines. So with KnowHow, I mean, picture KnowHow as a tool where I can basically take all of those assets, everything I've worked so hard to create, and just put it into an environment that just animates it in a way you never thought possible. It makes it possible to change and modify and be nimble and put it in any language um, and make it searchable. And we could go on and on about that. But for a trainer who wants to have impact, who wants to have influence, who wants to be nimble, um, I mean, know-how gives them superpowers. And for an HR person who wants clarity and a clear roadmap to success and the ability to make quick changes when a roadmap to get someone up to speed has to change because a regulation changes or they need evidence that something was completed, um, know-how is just a really elegant, streamlined way of providing a path for someone to get up to speed. Um, so it's no, we don't replace payroll.
Yeah.
We're not a traditional HRIS system where, this is a tool where I'm going to archive your 90-day review. But when you think about one of the number one reasons why people quit in this industry is because in the first 30 days, they just felt lost. They're just like, why is this so chaotic? Like, what is the path from day one to success? And so know-how provides that. It's just think of it, one elegant onboarding path that involves many stops along the way to HR, to training, to field work. So I think of know-how as kind of a tool that connects everything together in what is often a very tangled web.
How cool. So now give me an example. In my head, it's a system that you're uploading information to. You're probably building up some processes. You're doing it, but you say that you have AI, that you have large language models. You have how is that interact? How do they go hand in hand? And what would a
Yeah.
person experience when they're dealing with that sort of aspect of the app?
So I think the most practical example, Lee, would be a feature that's very popular in know-how called magic search. And
Magic
so
search.
let me
Okay,
give you three examples.
please.
So if I want to standardize the way I do something, the very first thing I have to think about is, well, one, where the heck am I going to put it?
Yeah.
And when do I have time to write it down? What if it changes? And honestly, I don't even know if my way of doing it's the right way of doing it. Right. So there's all these obstacles. So one of the first things that know-how does is it removes the let's call it like those like timeless concerns of like standardizing or creating helpful resources. So we do that in four ways. One is we have the largest templated environment in this case, property restoration of just expert written templated processes and SOPs and workflows that are just free to our customers. Right. And so it gives them a starting point for almost anything, almost any service, piece of equipment, piece of software, almost everything. And so the ability to just import that and then modify it and make it your own. But you could also use KnowHow's very powerful AI authoring tools where you can just say like, man, I just was told that, in the state of Missouri, we need to have protocols for how to tie in and harness in on a roof. What the heck? Like, when am I going to have time to, or you just ask Howie, we personified our AI around this character of Howie. And
Okay.
so you can just ask Howie, I need a process for how to anchor into a 3-story property in the state of Missouri. And he'll just instantly produce it. We like to say he'll produce a first draft, and then
Yeah.
it gives you the opportunity to update it. And then the ability for you just to take the documents that you already trust. Like many companies, they have, like long before they heard about KnowHow, they have documents that they trust. Either something they received from a company they respect, or something they got from a workshop, or something they got as part of a manual when they bought this piece of equipment, and they just have it. And so we say, just dump it into KnowHow. And KnowHow will, in some cases, turn it into step-by-step guidance. And in some cases, it will actually put it into what we call magic docs, which is the ability for us for Howie in your private environment to basically learn and comprehend that document. And you can just have a conversation with that document, if that makes sense.
That's amazing.
And so underneath it all, what does all that mean? So your question was like, well, where does AI come into this?
Yeah.
I'll give you an example.
Please.
In my neck of the woods, the building code is a 1,630 page document, right? When you compare that to the fact that most places in, say, the state of Colorado don't even have a building code, it's like quite the stark contrast. And so you can imagine an inspector or safety or a city person showing up on site and then asking someone who's wearing your t-shirt with your logo questions around, are they following the code?
Right.
I mean, what if that person, what if the language they speak at home isn't English? Like there's just so many.
Exactly.
Oxy. So with KnowHow, all they would do is they would just ask how. They would simply just, quickly type in a question like, what are the PPE requirements here in the, in the state of Alabama or in the blah, 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 blah. And how we would just provide instantaneous answers based upon all that company's processes and documentation and protocols and procedures. And then it just very nicely stacks up where I sourced all those responses from. And you'll see right away, I sourced it from the Alberta Building Code.
Oh, it'll tell you where it sourced it from?
If in a sense, as a person using KnowHow, if I've thrown the building code into KnowHow, if I've tossed it into KnowHow, how he just devours it, understands it. And then I can just bring up that document just the same way you'd launch a PDF, but now I could just have a conversation with the document. It's like, what else do I need to be concerned about? And just, and the document can start telling you like, oh, you probably want to be concerned about this, right?
Yeah.
Or like, how much am I allowed to charge for a home inspection? It's like $400. I'm like, oh, and where is that? It's on page 1,445. I'm like, oh, so that ability to be able to navigate through heavy regulatory and documentation very rapidly is an example of how we use AI. And there's a host of other ways, but essentially it's one of our focuses is how do you take someone who's only been rocking your t-shirt, Lee, for maybe a week and a half?
Yeah. And
they can answer what we call complex questions where normally you would say, it depends, I mean, we've got this process over here, but you also have to factor in the fact that the carrier guideline on this, that's a good question. Let me get back to you. That's really the type of questions that we're very focused on helping our customers answer, but right at the point of need.
Well, you gotta give me some insight. Where did this idea come from? What's the history of KnowHow? Like, it's a fascinating product and something that I'm sure every company on here is thinking, wow, I wish we could do that, right? Wish we could use that today. Where did this idea come from?
So I think at the most foundational level, KnowHow was, I think if you were saying, what's the genesis of KnowHow? So we actually had, funny enough, we had a product prior to KnowHow. And if people are familiar with let's call it stereotypical scaling technology stuff, we did a lot of it, down to San Francisco, accelerator programs. And we were building what we believed was essentially kind of a product that fell between YouTube and Pinterest.
Okay.
And so one being a long form way of sharing video-based whatever, and then one being more like a place for ideas. And we said, we think that there's an option, we think there's an opportunity to introduce a multi-sided consumer platform for sharing step-by-step guidance. And it got a lot of traction, and Forbes magazine thought we were going to be one of the next unicorns and all these, other these things. But what it all boils down to is we found that where we were, I suppose, solving the most interesting problems was in companies that were adapting our product to replace their operations manuals and facilitate very simple step-by-step guidance to largely service-based workforces. So we actually decided to shift our focus from building what we thought was going to be kind of a consumer platform
Mm-hmm.
to actually helping what our mission statement is helping service companies to deliver what they promise with confident workers. Meaning, as we make commitments as service providers, we're really making commitments. We're making promises on what we will do and what we will not do. And one of the biggest causes of heartburn is that it's becoming more and more difficult to be able to fulfill those promises at scale. And I think technology can help. So essentially, we made a decision to shift our focus. There was three founders. One, Pedro, runs all engineering and security. One, Travis, runs a bunch of hats. There's a bunch of hats, but one is product and one is marketing.
Okay.
And then myself, I've been involved in building a number of companies over the years, and we just did a deep dive. We actually spent about a summer. We spent the better part of a summer interviewing nearly 200 large service companies and just really understanding what was going on. And then with my experience in building and building and leading large like distributed franchise kind of trade service franchise companies. And just in my experience with that, recognizing that that's probably where we could do the most good. And so we right at the outset of COVID, we decided we started to kind of bring on board some property restoration firms and recognize that it was just a very unique level of complexity that they were experiencing. And so we just decided to really jump in. And so fast forward a little over 3 years later, the organizations that have been here and the companies and the industry has been just a wonderful host. And we really think that we've settled in and we like to think that we've tried to go from being a good house guest to trying to join the family here.
I like that. So tell me, what did it do to you launching right before COVID? Did that change things or did it speed it up because the human training couldn't take place? I think it would. I mean, I don't know. I'm just wondering, did it accelerate your growth because people needed the app-based training, the app-based onboarding where you couldn't always be around each other? What did that do to you?
It was an accelerant leap for sure.
Okay.
I think it was an accelerant because of the factors that you just described. I think you hit it on the head. Was a lot of organizations that traditionally were used to operating in person now had to think about how do we maintain consistency when we're not there.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, you started to experience just a need to prove that something was done the right way. You think about I think about all of the disinfection work. And we don't really call it disinfection work now. We call it, cleaning work. But it was, there was a need to be able to demonstrate that. There was also a need for companies to prove that they went through, say, like in parts of Canada, there was a need to prove that they went through, say, a daily COVID screening activity as a staff member.
Yeah.
So meaning that companies that could probably get away with, yelling something across the shop floor or maybe just being a little loosey-goosey on the safety protocol or maybe assuming that I'm going to make it by the job site so I can just tell them then. A lot of that went away and companies had to adapt. So we also benefited in COVID just basically because property restoration, rightfully so, was in most markets understood to be an essential service. So that was an opportunity for us to be able to partner with an industry that did a lot of good. And so I think that that led to some meaningful work from our perspective.
Wow. Well, and in addition to the app and the AI and the amazing work that you're doing, you had mentioned earlier that you also do research, that you also do some publications, and we were reading on here about the 10,000 one-star restoration online reviews a study that was done. Tell us what was this study? What did you find, and what did you find from this study?
Totally. And it's all free. You can go on tryknowhow.com/resources and it's all free. I think, let me just preface by saying, so, why do we do all this research? Uh, we are trying to build what we think is we refer to as like a necessary and compelling version of the future, in which, really, competency and skill, are no longer obstacles to accelerated growth. And whether, so that means like, we want to take language barriers off the table. We want to take, I didn't grow up with a dad with a tool shed off the table. Like, we just want to be able to say, hey, if you if you know how to take care of customers and do what you said you're going to do, then let us help you with accelerating training and hiring and onboarding and staff competency and stuff like that. So that's a version of the future that has required us to really, in a sense, do a lot of research to try to pick our bets, to place our bets. And so what that's led to is us adopting an approach to research where we've just found that the richest research, the richest data sets are those where we naturally maximize the amount of participants. And so ever since we stepped into this industry, Lee, we've said, if you'll participate in one of our studies, we'll give you all the findings. And
Okay.
and so that cadence has, I suppose, been a successful playbook of how we've been able to do study after study, because we're interested, like, we want to learn, and at the same time, we believe that it's part of just good stewardship is to try to float all boats, as they say, raise all boats. So let's
Yeah.
talk about that study.
Yeah. Let's talk about that one.
So one of the things that we recognized is that, particularly, in let's call it like insurance-driven restoration work, which is, your neck of the woods. One of the things that is really, let's call it like something we all want to avoid, is a bad customer experience or a bad policyholder experience.
Yep.
And so really, from our perspective, I think what we're really trying to maximize for is just like high quality outcomes all around. Everyone wants to provide a good experience. Everyone wants to be able to make a fair wage, a fair margin. And so that book that you're describing is really our attempt to start at the end and reverse engineer. So we said probably the truest representation of how a company's everything gets evaluated is what type of experience did you provide customer? And so we have a very strong practice of analysis and we're able to ingest a lot of data. And so we just said, why don't we take a data set? And we started with 1,000. We started with 1,000, Lee, 1,000 one-star online reviews of property restoration companies in the US.
Yeah.
And then we ended up extending the research to 10,000. And what we identified, other than the fact that there are some scoundrels.
Yeah. I would imagine you read some things.
Yeah, there was definitely there was a lot of, you have to read this one and make sure there's no children in the room, right?
Yeah, I would think so.
Oh yeah. Like marital infidelity all the way down to attempted, criminal activity, like it's just all over, right?
Oh yeah.
But what we learned is that there's 6 common reasons why a customer would just I've got this little wireless keyboard, would just pick up their keyboard, and just be like, I'm going to take time out of my day. I'm just going to punish this restoration contractor. And there are 6 reasons why they do that.
So all that you funneled down to 6 reasons.
To 6 reasons. Yeah. 6 common reasons.
Okay.
And then the question is that, well, what do you do about that? How can you be proactive?
Yeah.
And if I was in your shoes, as Alacrity, it's, well, how can we, because I would think that, at the end of the day, probably one of the biggest challenges I would assume a TPA deals with is that you're representing like a global brand, like I would say, like an insurance carrier. And when my house is damaged and I contact Allstate or I contact, whoever, Aviva, I mean, really the entire experience is really encapsulated under the brand of Aviva. And so whoever I deal with, and whatever my experience is, portions of it probably boil up to the carrier, and there's probably a risk of that policy renewal. And so I think it really goes to say, how do we maximize good outcomes and good experiences for customers? And so those 6 reasons, we can distill them down, but it won't surprise you that the number one reason represents a little over like 23% of the reason why a person would write a 1-star review is poor communication.
Yeah, I was thinking that's got to be number one.
But interestingly, when you dig into the data, you go deeper.
Yeah,
it's not just, well, they weren't calling me back, or they told me that they would call me and then they no-showed me. Just as many responses had to do with inter-crew dynamics and even the hostility between, say, an adjuster and a contractor or crew, or stressed out crew members interacting with each other. And just the way that the communication happened across the stakeholders separate from the customer. So just as many complaints were related to that as they didn't call me when they said they would.
Oh my goodness. How crazy is that? I bet you could come up with so much information reading all those 1-star reviews. I think it's fascinating that you could summarize them in 6 basic categories, but each of those have legs on their own, right?
And there's nuance, right? Like there's nuance, and I think that there's advantages to summarizing large data sets, but there's also, you just can't. I mean, and we've probably all seen some kind of graph of where you've got this scattered plot and you got this strange outlier out here, and you're like, and most people, you say, well, let's just do some data cleaning, and you scrub out that outlier. So averages and means do kind of scrub out that outlier. So on one side, I would say there is some value in probably like, let's call it like a director's cut of our studies. Which is probably like so weedy that like only people like you, Lee, that would read it, right? But then I think as we think about how do we make this more approachable and tactical, we do try to package it in resources that are probably a little bit more kind of like, well, what can I do about this? Thank you for rubbing my nose in this. Like, now what can I do about this? And so we try to be what can we do about this oriented? And naturally, our interest is so much of what causes negative experiences online, or let's call it negative experiences to be reflected online.
Yeah.
It's just a breakdown of process and communication, and oftentimes gaps in training that could have been avoided. I mean, hey, to drink my own Kool-Aid with a tool like KnowHow.
Right.
So now I think the question is like, well, why does it matter? And I think number one, I think it matters to carriers because for them, increasingly, what I've come to learn, what keeps carriers up at night is policyholder renewal rates and post-loss. And so I think it matters. The second thing is that I believe that one of the great competitive opportunities for contractors is to optimize for the experience that they give a customer, not just the service that they provide, but the experience. And there's a lot of good data to support that. But then underneath all that, brass tacks is how much does a 1-star review cost me, Lee? Like, just give me the number.
Right.
And so we were able to do some math on like what it actually costs a contractor when you get a 1-star, like I call it like a legit 1-star review. There's like non-legit ones. There's like, I worked for them and, and
bad
for whatever
employer.
reason, they didn't take care of me. So I'm going to pretend to be a customer and crush this person. I think we've done a pretty good job trying to be sensitive to where we think that's happening, and we scrub that from the data.
Okay.
But here's what we learned is that for the average contractor, for the average property restoration contractor who gets a 1-star review, like a merited 1-star review online, on average, it actually repelled about a little over 200,000, about $212,000 of lost potential revenue.
You put a financial number to it. That's pretty amazing.
It's, and we could get into say, well, how did you calculate that? And really a lot of it comes down to is you can look at number one is the reliance that the consumer has on consumer reviews and online reviews. So much so that the average consumer nowadays will consider an anonymous online review more trustworthy than a review from a friend or family member. It's like, wow, they're my friend. So, they're probably cushioning it a bit, or maybe rose-colored glasses. With this person, they got nothing in it. They got no dog in the fight, except just to be honest, right? And so you say, well, how I react to a random stranger's negative synopsis of an experience of being serviced by a company. Consumers today, on average, not everyone's, but high 80s, will actually consider that to be quite trustworthy. And so what we're interested in is not how many sales meetings did you have where they said, oh, and I read that review and it's causing me to question whether I should sign this contract. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about how many times at bat did you not even get because you repelled them just the first time they looked at it. So meaning they would have actually probably called your shop, but after doing a little bit of research, they're like, whoa. And so we've tried to quantify that a little bit in that study. And it's, the numbers are high.
That, I was looking for some people to come haul away some tree limbs I had cut. And I didn't really know what to do. So I went to Google and I said, tree people in Texas. And I found some people and they had stars, they're little stars. And I remember flipping through. I don't even remember how many stars, but like if it had a negative, this person didn't show up or whatever, like, well, they're gone, right? They're gone. Yeah. They're gone. And they missed out on, a few $100s of brush removal. I didn't even give them an opportunity. They might have had 99% good, but because that one negative was there, they lost out. And that's what you're saying here is that the importance of making sure, bringing this back home, right? The importance of making sure the people who are out there representing you are skilled and they have the abilities to be the best that they can be. That is so valuable. You can put a price tag on it, but you can hardly put a price tag on it. It's amazing.
And it goes, so I would say, well, a person would say, well, I think a person hearing that, like one of your listeners, they're probably going to fall into one of three buckets. Either one, they're looking at their online reviews right now and they say, I never give that any consideration. Last time I looked at Google was the last time I uploaded a drone shot of how many vans I own, right? It's like, but I'm not trying to, slight anyone there. That's a great way of showing your capacity. But at the end of the day, some people don't give it a second thought, right? But the fact is that I can tell you who does look at your reviews. If you don't, I can tell you who does. A caliber talent that are thinking about applying to your company and then don't.
Yeah. Because
incoming workforces today, they care about the online reviews of the companies they work for because they identify themselves in a way that previously workforces didn't with the company that they work for. And so if they think that that company is a scoundrel, even perceived as a scoundrel, they won't apply. And so a lot of the workforce challenges that we see, as we do a lot of research on workforces, a lot of our books, Why Workers Quit, largest workforce study ever done in restoration, Winning with Workers, kind of like a pinnacle work on like what is at play in the companies that have the best workforces. We have a book that gets published in September called Building Leaders, kind of a playbook for how you build the next generation of restorers. And then we do these studies, state of the industry, cost of doing business and restoration. If there's one thing that we've learned is that the number one problem is, can you attract and retain and accelerate staff? But a lot of people don't consider, what we've observed is that you are trying to solve these workforce problems. Sometimes, and I don't mean this in a disparaging way, but sometimes you're actually trying to solve workforce problems with like C-level and B-level candidates because you've repelled the A-level candidates because you didn't take care of your customers. That reflects online. And then A-level candidates who have optionality say, "Oof, I don't want to work for that company." If that's what comes out the kitchen door.
Oh my gosh. That you just opened my mind to a whole thing here. So tell me this, if somebody wanted to go and find some of the books that you published, some of the articles and the research, tell us again, where do we go to find that information?
Try knowhow.com. And then there's just a drop down that says resources. And in there, you can get, I think we do, we've done what we believe is a pretty prolific job of producing ebooks and studies. You know, we partner with CNR Magazine annually on the State of the Restoration Industry report. Recently partnered with the RIA with the new report, kind of a seminal financial study called The Cost of Doing Business in Restoration. We do pretty much annually, we publish a book on our research. So the one you're referring is called Five-Star Restoration Experiences.
Okay.
And then we did, Why Workers Quit, Winning with Workers, our new title, Building Leaders. So all of that comes out, and most of the time we'll complement our studies with kind of a podcast series. Oftentimes we'll actually pay a voice actor to read our books, and you can just get on Spotify and just listen to it.
Oh, that's great.
So we try to push it out there as much as we can, Lee.
Well, I'm excited. I'm going to actually get these books. I love reading books, and there's not just a ton of interesting ones about our industry. So you can count on me getting these. Well, Leighton, we're
Awesome.
here at the end of our time today. I just want to say thank you so much for being on. You really kind of opened my mind to a new way of onboarding, a new way of giving employees the tools that they need to be successful, and then a whole new look at what the importance of a one-star review really means. So thank you. Thank you so much for being on today, Leighton.
Yeah, you're welcome, Lee. And I think you're doing important work. So keep it up.
Thank you. I'd like to say thanks to Leighton for being on today. That was a really good podcast. That was a great conversation. And I'm excited to see where that technology is going to go, right? They're already doing things that we're hearing about, in the news these days with ChatGPT, Gemini, all those things. It seems like they're already there. They're already going. And I'm really excited to see where it's going. I'm also excited to get their books and to read about the research that they do and the knowledge that they're giving out. So I want to say thanks to Leighton for being on. Thanks to KnowHow for sharing your knowledge on this podcast today. To Rob Beller, who obviously listened to this podcast and made it to the very end. Just give me a call and let me know that you made it, so that I know that you did. But we always miss Rob when he's not here. But don't worry, everybody, he'll be back on next time. Thank you, Al. Thank you, Alicia. Thank you for all that you do there in the darkness behind the scenes. And to the audience, thank you so much for listening. And we hope everyone has a wonderful day. Goodbye, everybody.